exciting since well before COVID, or before COVID at least. But I can certainly think back of being able to be on airplanes going to some exciting destination. We're hoping that that'll happen again this summer, but it's fun to go on a trip. But the actual going, particularly going on an airplane, can be a little stressful. I mean, you go through all that, the chaos at the airport, just to get crammed into an airplane to little tiny seats and sit there and do nothing for several hours, and occasionally maybe get, if you're lucky, fed a very small snack or something like that. You go in this cramped plane, it's not a lot of fun, nothing to do. You sleep poorly, so why would you do it? And the answer is because of the destination that you're going to. I don't know anybody who goes on an airplane just because it's fun to go on, a commercial airplane. Maybe a little small airplane might be fun, but a commercial, nobody does it for excitement. You do it because of the destination. We've been talking about this pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Now, when I talk about having struggles going on an airplane and things like that, there's kind of a phrase these days that's become popular that kind of, I think, describes that kind of complaining about airplane. It's called first world problems, right? It's kind of how it is. We're talking about, in our Sunday services, over the summer, about this destination of going to Jerusalem to be able to worship. When they traveled, we're talking a little bit about some of the struggles in getting there. They're not first world problems. They are real problems. They are real struggles, real dangers to try to get to your destination. It's kind of like the Christian life at times. The way they keep motivated to go on this dangerous journey is to keep remembering the destination. And the Christian life is not a simple life. There are times in which we're asked to do things that are inconvenient, or maybe people aren't always happy with us. There might be folks who don't like Christians and things like that. We have to continually remember the destination. I'm not just talking about heaven, although that is certainly part of it. But our real destination, church, is to be in the presence with God. Always. We're always heading to know Him deeper, to be empowered in a greater way. Towards the way through the Psalms, we come to Psalm 120 and 134, a section of the Psalms that is basically like a section of songs, like a mini hymn book within the greater hymn book, which is really what the Psalms were. That there were songs that they would often sing in moments in which the people of God were gathered together and they're heading off to this destination. And they're reminding one another about why they're on this journey. A couple weeks ago, we looked at Psalm 120, which was a song of repentance, about a deliberate decision to follow and head out on this journey. Last week, Psalm 121, along the way, they're singing about following God's wisdom, not following common sense or other people's opinions, but they're following the wisdom of God as they journey. And this week, we come along to a song, Psalm 122, in which they're worshiping God, and in their worship, they're reminding each other of further worship that they're about to do, about the worship that they're going to do at the arrival, about this is what the destination will look like. It's all about refocusing their hearts. They're not focused on the struggles. They're not focused on the dangers. But instead, they look out, and they're overwhelmed by the glory of God that they get to participate in the city of Jerusalem. They're heading off to one of the great festivals that all the people of Israel gather to celebrate together. Just as we journey through life, excited at the prospect of real worship that radiates out from ourselves and affects the entire world. So in Psalm 122, we begin with the words, and I've got the title up there, and I'm leaving the title in, A Song of Ascents of David. Often in our versions of the Bible, there's titles throughout from Genesis to Revelation. Generally, they're added by editors. In the Psalms, these titles are part of the original part of the Psalms. In fact, if you were to pick up a Hebrew Bible, they actually make up verse 1. The verses are a little bit different. And it's important to remember that they are actually part of the original text. And in Psalm 122, it starts, A Song of Ascents of David. I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet have been standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. A Psalm of David. Some wonder that you could translate this idea of David and maybe of somebody that's dedicated to David, because a couple of verses later it talks about the throne of David, and we wonder, would he write that about himself? He might have. I kind of think, this is personal speculation, these songs are collected as a hymn book to remind them as they're traveling, but I kind of wonder, originally, maybe David wrote this song as a welcoming song. He had gone out, and early in his time as king, had come up against this pagan city and conquered it under the power of God, and taken this pagan city and turned it into his capital. And eventually moves the tabernacle of God there and makes this new city that he's just conquered, that he names Jerusalem, that he renames Jerusalem. He makes it the center of worship. And I kind of wonder, would he write this psalm initially as kind of a welcoming psalm to encourage the people? Yes, let's gather. And then over the years, this psalm, it would have been used for various things. Psalms used in various times in different ways. I mentioned a couple weeks ago, these psalms were not only just pilgrimage songs, they were also songs that were sung in the temple by the priests as they were walking up each step. Originally, this being a welcoming psalm of David, eventually becomes this one to remind people, hey, we've been to Jerusalem before. We've seen God act in our midst. We've been able to worship with all the other people of the land, and it's been life-changing and altering. We stood in the gates of the city. Let's do it again. Now, this is an interesting psalm because I say Psalm 120, 134 are kind of this set of hymns within a hymn book, and this is towards the beginning. And yet it's a song of arrival. It's kind of a song that we've gotten there. Now, just because it's towards the beginning doesn't necessarily mean they always sang it at the beginning. Some of you might be old enough to remember the olden days when we used to at church use something called a hymn book. Many of you are looking around trying to read books. We actually still have hymn books. They're over there in this room if you want one. When we used to use hymn books, we never showed up one week and start saying, well, this week let's sing hymns 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And next week 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's not how it worked. You skipped all over the book. You picked what worked for the week. The vast majority of them actually we never sang. Probably about 3/4 of them, I had no idea what they ever sounded like because I never heard them. Anyways, it could be like this, that Psalms 120, 134, maybe they picked out which one seemed to fit that week or that moment. But I kind of also think that it would work still singing this song of arrival towards the beginning of the journey, because it's important to remember where we're going. The journey's going to be hard. The journey's going to be dangerous. And you know what? We have short memories as people, do we not? Oh, God does something good. But all we remember is the anxieties, the problems. And we focus there. We focus on these things. It's kind of how we're programmed as a society today. I mean, this has always been true. You can find it in the very earliest parts of the Bible, but it kind of maybe gets emphasized a little bit more these days, that our society plays on the way in which we're naturally wired to reinforce the idea that we are people that, because of our sinful nature, are problem bent. We tend to focus on what is anxiety causing. You watch the news, everything is deliberately trying to create or overemphasize problems. You listen to politics, it's always about what's wrong with the other guy. We watch advertising, it's always trying to create this idea that, hey, your life is missing something, and if you buy our product, it's all going to be fixed. It's playing up this idea, this natural bent that we have within our sinful nature, that we are all victims. And we play up this idea of a victim identity within our own identities. And yet, boy, we need that end yet. We are a people called to come before the Creator of heaven and earth. He invites us into His presence. In fact, not just invites us, we're going to come in a couple of verses to we are commanded to come into the presence of the Almighty Sovereign of the universe. Yeah, but I got problems over here. I got issues in my life over there. But I'm called to enjoy God. Pilgrims, last week we saw they looked up to the hills. And up on the hilltops, they could see the threats. They could see alternatives to going to Jerusalem. They could see everything else. Logic dictates, stop the journey. Stop here. And instead, they sing. They remind themselves, and as they sing, they remind each other. Because we've said this in this series. When we sing, it's not just between me and God. Everybody else is meant to hear. They sing that the glory of God is bigger than that which distracts me. The glory of God is more than what are the problems that threaten me. Jude little tiny book in the New Testament, right towards the back. It's a book in which a lot of bad things are going. There is a great benediction at the end of the book that I'm going to use at the end of the service. It says, it's all about God who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you blameless before the presence of his glory with great joy. This stumbling, we stumble. Absolutely, there's a threat of stumbling. That's why it's in there. But God is a God who protects you. And what does he do? Rather than letting us stumble, this is his goal, to bring you to the presence of his glory with great joy. Not only helps us along the journey, he's taking us somewhere. Psalm 92 is another song about gathering. We're told at the beginning that it's a Sabbath song. And for those who were with us on Thursday at our seniors potluck, I read this song. And it says there, it is good to give thanks to the Lord, to sing praises to your name, O Most High, to declare your steadfast love in the morning and your faithfulness by night. Then it goes on to talk about, well, this doesn't sound very politically correct. They even uses the word stupid in our English, some of our English translations. The stupid are going to miss it. The evil are going to be punished. But what great hope there is for the righteous. It's all about praising God today. Not because I feel like worshiping, but to remind myself and to remind everyone else who is here that God is the center of my attention. His glory is my focus. His love overcomes. And that is what I'm staring at. Verses 3 and 4 read like this: Jerusalem, built as a city that is bound firmly together, to which the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, as was decreed for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. Well, here David is excited about the city of Jerusalem as he writes this. He brings these words to us. Now we know Jerusalem in of itself was not a perfect place in times. Remember Jesus at one point, he goes into the city on Palm Sunday riding in. And what does he do right away? He goes to the temple and he gets mad at everybody. Certainly, as we go through the New Testament, he does that several different times. A little earlier, in Luke chapter 13, a little earlier in the Gospels, word comes to Jesus. King Herod wants to kill him. And in Luke 13, he starts to weep. And he starts to weep and say, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I desperately wanted to gather you as a mother gathers baby chicks under my wings." It's really quite a remarkable response, because King Herod wants to kill him. Now, the thing we have to remember about that passage, King Herod has nothing to do with Jerusalem. He's not the king of Jerusalem. He's the king. He's been appointed by, or allowed to be king of the Galilee region by the Romans. He does go to Jerusalem at the time of the crucifixion, but he's not king of Jerusalem, but he's somebody who claims to follow God, and that immediately makes Jesus think of Jerusalem. It's not a place where everything goes well. Part of the reason why Jerusalem, as we go through history of the Bible, is not always a place where everything goes right, is because of something that's mentioned up here. It's to which the tribes go, the tribes of Israel. And you go through the Old Testament, particularly you go to Judges. I got to tell you, You go through the entire book of Judges, that's a hard book to read. Everything always is going, nobody is acting godly. Almost. I mean, there's some exceptions. But what's happening throughout the entire book, there's all these pagan groups out there, but the real enemy is the tribes of Israel. The followers of God are not given along. At one point, if you go to Judges chapter 12, you got a group that's testing another group. They're saying, hey, can you say this word, Sibboleth? And if they say it with a funny accent, they kill them. Kind of reminds me in the New Testament, Peter is warming himself by the fire. He's right in the middle of all of his denials of Jesus on the night that Jesus is arrested. And a servant girl looks at him and says, you got to be a follower of Jesus. You got a goofy accent like those Galileans. They often were divided amongst these different tribes. They could be rivals. They could be enemies. They eventually divide the whole kingdom in two parts, and one of many different times where things happen. There's so many causes to these divisions and rivalries. Not long after the time of Jesus, there's a great man of God who writes some incredible books that still speak to us today by the name of Augustine, who writes, a Christian should be an alleluia from head to foot. Should be an alleluia for head to foot. Do you know what? If that is true, there is no room for distraction. There's no room for rivalry. It is so easy to be offended or overwhelmed by what we do not like. And in those moments, it is impossible to focus fully on Christ. In other words, it's impossible to make him the center of my attention because my focus is on what I do not like. We've only got so much spiritual and mental energy to spend. And yet God is doing something great. Sometimes with poetry, it's hard to know exactly how to translate it. Do you do it literally word for word, or do you try to make it somewhat poetic so it kind of matches the language? And there was a gentleman by the name of Cloverdale who translated a version of the Bible some 100 years before the King James Version came out. And in the early 1500s, he translated verse 3 here. Jerusalem is at unity with itself. Kind of a fancy way of just translating, I get to Jerusalem, and we can all come together united. We can all come together despite the fact there's rivalries, there's division, there's struggles, there's things we disagree with, but you know what? We can come here because this is the place we gather to worship. A place where my highest priority is Jesus Christ. My highest priority is worship. It's interesting here, and I already alluded to this, in verse 4, it was decreed they go to Israel. And is it, for a lot of us, in the way that we might define worship, is it still worship if it's something that I'm forced to do, I'm commanded to do, rather than a feeling? Is worship an emotion that I have? We live in an age in which emotions and feelings mean everything. They dictate everything. I do what feels right. Generally. Not always. I mean, we understand the idea that sometimes we do what's decreed. As we come into the beginning of May, it means we've just passed tax season. And I don't know how many were like me. And the last couple of months, sat down and thought, I really don't feel like doing this, but I got to get my taxes done. And I got to tell you, if I sent a letter to CRA saying, sorry, I didn't feel like doing my taxes this year, do you know what they're going to say? I don't care what you feel, right? It's commanded. You're going to do it. Well, this is kind of like worship, because we're not told to go to Jerusalem when we feel like it, when the emotion is there. Feelings might be the highest priority in society, but they're not the highest priority in the Christian life. God commands the people to gather to worship. And He is my God, He is my Lord. If He tells me to do it, I'm to do it. There is a really old joke about the gentleman who is lying in bed and his wife comes and says, come on, it's time to go to church. He says, I don't feel like getting out of bed this morning. And she said, and he's cajoling him, and he finally says, why should I go to church if I don't feel like it? And her answer is, number one, it's good for you. Number two, you're the pastor. I did feel like coming to church today. Except when I first got up. We did have highway cleanup yesterday. I got to be honest, it was very sensitive this morning. Why does God take us going to worship so seriously? And the bottom line is this: it is a time to refocus our lives on God. Particularly, maybe most importantly, when we don't feel like it. Because it's those moments we most need to look again at the glory of God and be captivated by it. To again overcome tribal divisions by seeing His goodness. To join together as an entire people to give thanks to the name of the Lord, particularly when it's hardest to say it, because it changes everything. Verse 5. There, again, we're talking about Jerusalem. Their thrones for judgment were set. The thrones of the house of David. I said that yesterday we had highway cleanup, and I gotta be honest, I was not a great Canadian because of it. I did not get up at 4 in the morning to watch the coronation of King Charles III. I'm sure all the rest of you were better Canadians than I was. You were probably all up at 4 a.m., drinking your tea, eating your crumpets, and celebrating the fact that we have a new king. I do know, even though I didn't get up and watch it, that the king was put on his new throne. Is it much more important that Jesus is on the throne? This is nicely put together with this idea of the tribes, these different divisive groups coming together. Do you think as people come together, there is something in the back of their head that is concerned that, hey, we bring all these different divisive groups together and there isn't justice? I mean, they wronged me. They wronged me. Shouldn't there be justice? But this is a recognition that there, okay, these divided tribes come, and there is justice. There's thrones for judgment. Here we have the thrones of the house of David. Who is in control of justice, me or God? And that's the call here. Worship refocuses us so we see something that is bigger than self and emotions and circumstances of life. Instead, I'm focused on God's sovereignty. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22 reads, "But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels and festal gatherings, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enthroned in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant." This book, Hebrews, in the New Testament, it focuses back a lot on some of these images of the temple and the priesthood. And why does it do it? It's because not long after Jesus is raised from the dead, the disciples start going out and proclaiming the good news. As the New Testament is still being written, the Romans come along and the Jews rebel, and there's a big war, and Jerusalem's destroyed. The temple is torn down to its foundations. And there are people, certainly among the Jews, but even among the Christians, who are saying, if Jerusalem is destroyed, what do I base my faith on? We're supposed to go to Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem's not there anymore. Coming to Jesus is coming to Jerusalem. In fact, if you go through the New Testament, they're always concerned with the temple. Now we're told that the Holy Spirit resides within our lives. Christians are personally the temple of God. And whenever we gather, whether it's in Jerusalem or whether it's in Lamont, the people of God gathering, it's going to Jerusalem because we're going to Jesus. It's going to the temple because we are collective. We are the temple. This is a critical moment whenever the people of God gather. Because we're now gathering to say that He is indeed the sovereign. Yesterday was all about the pomp of a new king being put on the throne. When we gather, we're always reminding one another that Jesus is on the throne, that He is king, that He is sovereign. And my focus is on Him, not the things that are bothering me, not calling out for justice, because I know that the one who is just is the one in control. The psalm ends. This is going to click forward. That might work. No, we've got to. Sometimes remotes work, sometimes they don't. Did it disappear, the slide? I even remember making this slide. I know it was there initially. Anyways, bear with me. Okay, it won't be behind me. But it says this as we finish this psalm. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they be secure who love you. Peace be within your walls and security within your towers. For my brothers and companions' sake, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good. Some of us certainly looked at this and rightly said we should be praying for modern Jerusalem. That is absolutely true. But I think there is more to it than this. Sundays and other times where we gather together in worship, it's a small part of our week, and yet it has huge implications. It changes all. I want to read a little quote out of this Charles Spurgeon, who was a Christian preacher in the 1800s, he wrote this great illustration. He said, look at the mower in the summer's day. By the way, he's going to use real old technology. When he talks about a mower, we're not talking about lawnmowers. We're talking about going out and farming. With so much to cut down ere the sun sets, he pauses in his labor. Is he a sluggard? He looks for his stone and begins to draw it up and down his scythe. And he starts to make sound effects. Picture this old preacher up making sound effects. With a rink-a-tink, rink-a-tink, rink-a-tink. Is that idle music? Is he wasting precious moments? How much he might have mowed while he'd be ringing out those notes on his scythe. But he is sharpening his tool. And he will do far more when once again he gives his strength to those long sweeps which lay the grass prostrate in rows before him. What he's trying to say here is worship is like sharpening your tools. It is preparing you. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Read one author this week who said, I could give you a definition, a dictionary definition of peace. He says that doesn't cover what really is being implied in the Psalms. It is the result of a God who is healing, forgiving, and calling us. It is a result of God's work in our life. And then he starts to talk about security, which is living in ease in such a way that I know the situations of life are fully under control because God's got it. The world doesn't look like it's under control. But maybe worship is truly finding a new way to understand the world in a way that everybody out there doesn't get. Maybe worship is starting to understand the world in a new way. It is being changed by that. It is prioritizing worship. And not problems, not anxieties of this world. Maybe this world would be truly different if the church really gathered together to focus on Jesus all the time. I talked to, as we did prayer time, about praying for rain and it happening. And saying, maybe the world will be different if the church really prayed. Maybe that's what this is, really. Saying, okay, there's a lot of problems out there, but I see Jesus. There's things that scare me, but I see Jesus. And I'm going to declare his name publicly amongst the people of God. And peace that comes from the worship of God, it radiates out into the world. It changes everything. So in conclusion today, we're refocusing on glory. Spring, in my mind at least, is always such a great opportunity to worship. Doesn't it just feel like the world is coming back to life right now? Coming back to green, the flowers are starting to come up. It's a great illustration for the miracle of life as everything starts to work towards blossoming. Today we do the work of worship. To read scripture, spend time in prayer, to sing. Because it changes everything. And so in this spring, we come together refocused on God. We're going to sing a song that really is about spring being worship. Old song, Joyful, Joyful. And I'm going to invite our worship team to come forward as we worship this great God.
Spring usually means that we're on our knees in the ground, in those flowers, planting our seeds. But we're going to stand for this one. Joyful, joyful, beautiful.